All right. Well, we are live. So this is the first effort at a new way of doing these meetings. So for the last, it's been about a year, right, Charles?
Yeah. Has it been that long? I guess so.
I think so. So for about the last year, we've been meeting in person with people here in the Roanoke Valley for our meetup, which is called Question Christianity. And to give a little background for people who watch this later or maybe haven't bumped into this before, Question Christianity is a coalition of both the Ratio Christi chapter here in Roanoke, as well as the Reasonable Faith chapter here in Roanoke, which Charles is heading up. So we were hoping to try something via Zoom. We gave that a shot last time and didn't have a whole lot of people show up. So we're going to try it this way and give a kind of a different format a shot. So there's kind of two ways to interact here, and that's kind of the challenging part with this group, because our goal is not to have a talk at you kind of teaching session. The goal is to really have people interact and to really have a good conversation, because Question Christianity really has two kind of goals. And one of those goals is to be able to reach out and have good conversations with people of all faith backgrounds, no faith backgrounds, anything you can think of. And then the second is to help equip Christians to be able to have good conversations, to be able to defend what they believe, to see that there are good reasons for believing in the Christian worldview. So it's kind of got that twofold purpose. If either of those sound interesting to people, then this may be a group you'd like to be a part of. So feel free to reach out and interact any way possible. For these meetings, we're going to have two kind of real ways to interact. One of those is through the chat. So feel free to drop questions, comments, whatever in the chat, and we can interact with it that way. The second way we'd like to interact with people is we can also bring people on, so it takes on the feel of a little bit more like our live meetings. So if you're comfortable coming on, whether you have a camera or not, you can just throw up a blank image. As long as you have a mic on your computer or cell phone, you can at least come up and join us via voice. And we'd love to interact some more with people that way. So if you're willing to come live and want to have a discussion that way, please drop a message in the chat, send me a personal message via Facebook, or if you have my cell phone, you can contact me that way. And let us know, and I can send you a link, and you're welcome to join us for the live portion of the chat. But otherwise, feel free to comment in chat, interact. Again, this is an interactive thing, so we'd love to have as many people interacting as possible. Speaking of which, let's see. Kevin,
hey,
you're with us.
Hey. Yes.
Glad to have you.
I had to finish eating,
I understand. I saved dinner for afterwards, but
okay.
Hey,
all right.
That's all right. So I just kind of finished giving an introductory spiel for why we're going with this format. Any comments from you guys just into general what the group is about, or any of the history behind it?
It's because Jesus used that format.
Well, yeah.
No, I like it. I think we did a good synopsis there. We're excited to have interaction, and if you didn't say it like this, we encourage people who may have different opinions to share those with us. So we're not at all offended if you tell us things like you don't believe what we believe, or you think maybe what we believe is dumb. So we're willing to engage in conversation with anyone.
Very true. And we've tried to do that in a few different ways over the history of this group. Can you give us a little, either of you give us a little background on some of just the ways we've tried to interact with people in the past?
Yeah, well, I think we've all had some fun going, and it is fun. We go down to events that I think most people would typically not associate with fundamental Christianity. We've gone down there in the open, so we're openly declaring what we believe, but in I think a very passive and friendly way. It is what we believe. We want to know what you believe. We've done surveys with people, trying to more deeply understand their points of view. So, and maybe that's a good thing to say, which is I don't think that, I'd like to say that we're not so obtuse as to think that we can just go push ideas on people and expect them to automatically change what they believe. So we want to meet people where they are. We're very curious to actually know what people think. So it's not a ploy. We have surveys. We've gone to events like Color Parade, all kinds of different venues that, as I said, were not typically conducive to what most people would associate with classical Christianity. And we just want to know where people are. We want to dialogue with them, and I think that's been very positive. People seem to want to know why we're even there. I don't know. It's been fun. What am I missing?
I think that covered it pretty well.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. Well, our topic for tonight, we're kind of diving back in where we had kind of left off with the live group. A few months back, we had started a new series on really questions for Christianity. So these are, common objections that come up to the Christian worldview. And we just started in on this. We barely had time to touch the surface on this topic in our last live meeting, which is what's up with miracles. So we're really looking at objections to miracle claims. So I'm going to kind of dive in, since currently it's mainly Kevin and Charles in here and chat with me. Please, both of you, feel free to interact with the material, stop, ask questions, pick it apart, that sort of thing. The same thing we would kind of hope to do if we were doing this in a live meeting.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So we're going to take a look at miracle claims. And specifically, we took a look at a video from Sam Harris last time. We're not going to dive into that today, but feel free to look it up. If you put in YouTube Sam Harris and miracles, it'll come up. So why do people have objections to miracle claims? Some of the reasons, and this is by no means all-inclusive, are listed here. So people that hold to strict naturalism rule out miracles from the start. So in that worldview, if you're holding to a strict naturalistic perspective, you're probably going to rule out miracles to begin with because there's not really room for them within your worldview.
So I got a question on that one. Yeah. Maybe you can flesh this out a little bit. What would be the difference to someone who's holding strict naturalism and someone that says, well, I just believe in science? Is there a difference? And maybe someone who believes in science, could they still believe in miracles?
I think you could. I think that it depends on how you're using that science. Is science the basis for your worldview versus a element of your worldview? So for me, I would say science is actually a tool that can help us understand reality. It can help us to get clues about the world we're in and to maybe better understand how we've gotten to the point we are. But the scientific method is not the core of everything I base my worldview on. So it's an element of it. So someone could easily have science as an element of their worldview without being a strict naturalist. And by that, what I mean is someone who holds strictly to natural causes for everything in existence. So you're holding to life as we know it having a naturalistic cause, the universe having a naturalistic cause, everything within the universe having a naturalistic cause. Does that kind of...
Yeah, so I think that's important. So I like how you brought up this thing called the scientific method. So people just throw this word science around a lot. You know, I believe in science. Like, what does that really mean? And so I think, as you will illustrate, there's a difference between science, which is a methodology, and naturalism, which is a fundamental worldview. So, yeah, that might be helpful for some people.
I would agree. Kevin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, naturalism is a metaphysical philosophy. It is not the same thing as scientific methodology. There are some scientists, eminent scientists, who are not naturalists metaphysically. They believe in something other than physical reality, but are committed to the scientific method in understanding physical reality, at least surface phenomena.
So
But,
I could, go ahead.
yeah, but it doesn't follow that all causes, especially ultimate causes, have to be within nature. It sort of begs the question of whether there's something besides nature or not.
I think that's a good explanation. And we've got a comment from Michelle Warren. I think there's a difference, too, with believing certain people can perform miracles versus believing that God performed miracles and prayers can influence that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good distinction. And as we kind of go through this, we're really going to kind of separate that out a little bit. I think that is a very important distinction, though.
Yeah, in fact, it reminds me of a post I was reading today talking about the miracle efforts a few months ago from Bethel Church, very well known as a group that claims that their leaders and those who are trained by them properly can perform miracles on demand. And this one story, one of the leaders' small children had died, very, very tragic. And they held something like a week-long resurrection vigil, claiming that the infant would certainly be raised from the dead. So that brought a lot of scorn on them on the one hand, but then I think some of the defenders within Christianity of Bethel didn't make this distinction that Michelle is making, I think, because we shouldn't have been so rough on Bethel. I mean, we should have faith. We should, believe in miracles.
Faith in what?
Right. Faith in our ability to.
Yeah, so that word faith is so easily thrown around. And then they end up on Caleb's bullet point number 3 there.
Good. Well, that's a good place to leave off. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so, some other reasons that people may reject miracle claims is they may be looking for a reason to reject the Bible or other spiritual beliefs. So miracles may be a key point for them where they say, okay, I've never seen this happen, so I'm going to reject the Bible as well. Like Kevin was talking about with Bethel Church, They may have been let down by miracle expectations. I've heard this multiple times from people who have left the Christian faith. And one of those reasons has been I really needed a miracle at a particular time in my life, and it didn't happen. So that was it for me. That is a rough one.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking because on one side, I totally sympathize emotionally with that. You know, someone was led down a path to believe that this is the way, you know, faith works or that God works or something like that. And so when they're taught something like that and then they're almost inevitably let down, you know, then people will end up walking away thinking that they, you know, gave Christianity a try, and it's not really. It's sad. It's heartbreaking, actually.
It is. It really is. And I've heard a few of those stories, and each one seems to be more heartbreaking than the next. You know, I think, you know, the last two reasons here are not understanding definitions, which I think Michelle's comment really touched on too. So how do we define miracles? We'll get to that in a minute. But, you know, not having a good definition, I think some people reject for that reason. And then, of course, rejecting because they've never seen one. They've never personally experienced a miracle of any kind. So they think, okay, well, there must be no basis for this then. Let's see here. All right. So now we're going to move on to defining terms a little bit. So what is a miracle? All right. What is a miracle? Kevin, Charles, any definitions? Anybody in the chat have a definition of a miracle?
Oof. Wow. Well, maybe one of the first things I'd like to get out there is the difference between a miracle and providence. So I think sometimes those are confused, or maybe not even understanding that there's a difference, or what even maybe providence means. So maybe I'll take a step with the first one. So a miracle is something beyond, that's supranatural. So it's beyond natural. So maybe, well, creating the universe out of nothing would be a miracle. Something that could not be explained by any natural cause, I think, would necessarily be miraculous.
Okay.
You want to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, there's this element of direct intervention, and it is important to distinguish between God's general providence and the ways He's ordered things, and what we experience as in the moment miracles. I'm not fully convinced that in God's mind it's different because He's known what He will bring about, right? But going off topic. So I think one reason people object on definitional grounds is sometimes the easy definition of miracle is something that violates the laws of nature. But I don't think violates is the right term.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't think that's right.
So this idea of superseding, there are many laws of nature, right? And there's a natural order of cause and effect that we can observe. It's part of God's design. It's one of the reasons we argue that there's design in the natural order, right? Because there is this observable orderliness, something like law. But law itself isn't a thing. The scientific endeavor to discover natural laws is progressive. What we really mean by it, I think, philosophically, is this seems to be the way things normally work, as best as we can track. So I just want to throw that out there. A law isn't a thing. for what it's
Right,
worth.
right.
So if God normally does things one way and then does, occasionally does something in an unexpected way, that's not a violation of some law that he broke. Oh, I'll leave off there.
I think that's a good point. I do want to hop back to probably our what was on our prior slide just a bit. Michelle had another comment, which I think is good to tack on as another reason people may not believe miracles or have objections, is not understanding the reasons behind it. Why would there be one in one scenario and not another? And I think that actually kind of goes somewhat into my definition. I would say a miracle is a supernatural interaction with the natural world. But I would also tag on that it also has a communicative purpose. So I think that miracles, from a Christian definition, would almost require a communicative nature to it, as it's affirmation of something. It's a distinct marker of God's signature on reality, if you will. So I think it has a communicative purpose. And even if the recipient of that communication doesn't necessarily understand that at the given time, I don't think it necessarily means that it's not communicative in some way, shape, or form. Got a couple other comments here. Michelle's doing some great interaction with us tonight, so this is great. She said that a good distinction between miracles and providence, something unlikely happening, is not the same as a miracle. And we're really going to flesh that out here more too, in terms of even breaking our definitions down further to make sure we're all kind of talking the same language here as we go through things. And then she had a question that I honestly don't have a good answer to. Maybe one of you guys do. Do Catholics have a definition of miracles?
I guess our definitions would probably be similar, although I'm wondering where they would fall on the last part of your definition, which is kind of the end purpose. Like the end purpose of miracles is not necessarily just to do something that's interesting or fascinating, but it usually has an end purpose or design.
Yeah, and this is from a quick Google search, but it actually seems, and granted, I got to look this up in one of the Catholic catechisms or something first to back it up, but it does say that I believe miracles are the works of God either directly or through prayers and intercessions of specific saints. There is usually a specific purpose connected to a miracle. The conversion of persons to Catholic faith, or construction of a church desired by God. So, seems like it would at least be a fairly cogent definition in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to disagree with Catholics on every single point. Matter of fact, there's a large amount of number of things that we'd probably agree on. Not that the things that we disagree on are unimportant.
That's a really good way of putting it. So, to flesh out our definitions a little more, I wanted to talk about what do we mean by unlikely?
Is that an open question there?
Yeah, fully open question.
What is unlikely? Oh, well, I guess we could talk about chance. What are the chances? Would this thing, if you rolled a dice and you got a 6 2 times in a row, would that be miraculous? What are the chances? What if you did it 3 times in a row? I don't know. I don't think I like the probability part in the miracle, but yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a statistics and probability kind of person, but I think probability can help a lot in fleshing out some of these definitions and where we draw certain lines.
Okay.
That's my opinion anyway, and that's kind of how I've laid out some of this material.
Let's talk about that for a second. So, if the miracle is something that goes against nature, then the probability of it happening naturally should be 0.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would think that it would be 0 or...
Which is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, or very close to 0.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
Michelle commented here as well. Let me see if I can throw this up there. If it's possible to happen, what makes it special? So I think that fits into unlikely. So it's something that we would probably consider possible, just not necessarily something that would usually happen.
Yeah, this actually comes. That's a good question in the light of when we start talking about design. So probability definitely comes into play when we're trying to decide whether or not something is designed or is it just, well, I guess natural. So there, like a good definition of, a good way to determine, it's kind of a subjective thing, but a good way to determine if something's designed is you have a low probability with an independent pattern. So a good example would be like a license plate. So every license plate actually has a very low probability. And the probability that you'd have any license plate, even if it's just random, like that's pretty unique. Think about how many license plates there are, and then each individual license plate is highly unlikely. You could say the same thing about drawing or shuffling a deck, and the chance that that deck would be shuffled in just that order is just extremely improbable. And every time you shuffle it, I think I've actually heard that if you shuffle a deck well, every time you shuffle it, it's likely that is the first time that deck has ever had that specific order of cards. Like it's that unique. No one has ever shuffled the deck like that before in history. So, which is kind of interesting, but it's still random. It's not necessarily designed. So something is designed. I don't know how much this really has to do with miracles, but since we're on the subject, something might be intuited as designed when it is extremely unlikely and it conforms to an independent pattern. So although maybe all license plates have a low probability, if you saw a license plate that said like Caleb on it, CALEB, well, that, alphanumerically might be just as unlikely as any other 5-letter license plate, but it confers to an independent pattern, like that's outside of, just random license plates. Or if you were to look at a deck after you shuffled it and then you looked and it was like in perfect suit order, number and suit order, you go, oh, that's an independent pattern, and so it kind of conforms to that. I don't think this is really randomly shuffled. I think, someone came in here and put the deck in a specific order. So that's my thoughts on if it's possible to happen, what makes it special. Well, maybe, I guess the answer to that is the independent pattern. Does it conform to some independent pattern? So if something just seems unlikely, like, wow, there's a weird flower growing in my yard. I mean, it's unlikely that flower should grow right there next to that right there blade of grass. But if the night before, I'm kind of making this up as I go, if the night before I'm praying for a miracle, Lord, not that this would be a good thing, but just to demonstrate the idea, Lord, if you're really there and you really want to show me that you exist, would you grow a flower right here? And then the next morning that flower appears right there. Now you have an independent pattern that matches to that high improbability. that's not a good thing to do. You shouldn't pray for God to grow a flower in a specific place. But the independent pattern, I think, would be the answer to the question. I know you got something to say about that, Kevin.
No, I don't actually. I really like that. Likelihood or unlikelihood has to be a factor, but Caleb's not saying that's the essence of a miracle. It's something that's part of this definition, right?
Yeah, I think that
Right.
actually that's going to map well with, I think, what Caleb said about the miracles having kind of a purpose to them.
Yeah.
We'll see where we go.
Yeah. So before let's look at a couple other definitions real quick. What about improbable? How would we distinguish that from unlikely?
Oh, I see. So, I think I'm now catching on to what this slide says. So, what is a miracle? That might be one difference, one question. But how would I define just unlikely as a term in itself? Like statistically? It's not, yeah.
Right. And in the context of miracles, to make sure as we kind of discuss this subject, is our language being precise enough? Because I think a lot of times we clump things together so much language-wise that it's like, we could interchange unlikely and a miracle in some sentences, and it wouldn't change that at all. Hey, I found this parking spot. It's a miracle, or it was unlikely. It means the same thing. But I want to make sure that we're really precise in how we're talking about this, because unlikely is in some meaningful ways different from improbable, as is different from impossible.
Is everything that God does a miracle?
Gosh, that's an interesting question.
That's a real interesting question.
I would, gosh, maybe. Is that specific enough for an answer? Maybe. I think it's easier to define improbable than it is to answer that question. Is everything that God does a miracle? That's your wife, Kevin. You answer.
She doesn't like my answers. That's why she asked on the show. You got better answers than me. What can I say? You know that.
Okay, so the reason that's hard is because certainly some of the things that God has done is to set up a natural process in a natural world. That's certainly biblical. God created the universe. And that was a miracle to create the universe, but then he created miraculously a system that seems to obey certain natural laws, and that's all well and fine. So if something that happens as part of that resultant natural process, is that in itself a miracle? Is that something that God has done kind of indirectly? He knew how the world was going to end up. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, if we say everything's a miracle, then nothing is. But I think we can say the natural order is based in the supernatural miracle, grounds it. And really, I think Jonathan Edwards is good here. He argued that even though God has created an orderly system, the cosmos and its laws as we see them, it's not in the deistic way of, he wound up the clock and then he stepped away and it's able to work on its own now. Rather, he's intimately involved in sustaining this process. He upholds it constantly, directly, even though it is an orderly system. It is in no sense independent from God.
I got a quote here that I heard on the White Horse Inn one time, so I liked it enough to write it down. It said, this is on how God creates. God creates something out of nothing and then establishes a process by which something comes out of that which he created. So it's ex nihilo, comes out of nothing. That's miraculous. And then he's establishing a process by which other things can't come out of. That doesn't mean he doesn't continue to act miraculously in other ways. So I still don't feel like I gave a good answer to the question.
But he has willed, God has willed for there to be a pattern.
Yeah, sure. It's wonderful.
In many different senses.
Yeah.
But he has not willed to be bound himself. The pattern is just that. It's not a law over God. And so I think this unlikely, improbable, I also like the word exceptional. At least from our perspective of what we're talking about.
I think that's a good point. I think for me, the question blew Michelle's mind. She made a comment about that. For me, I think it's a matter of perspective from a natural world, living in the natural world perspective. Then it could be that anything God does to directly interact would be a miracle. However, my perspective is not always wide enough to encompass what may be going on within the spiritual realm. And from that perspective, then if my worldview, if my understanding of reality were enough that it could encompass a bigger perspective, then perhaps nothing would be a miracle in that sense, because the definition kind of falls apart when your perspective gets big enough. That's a really deep answer or a really bad answer. I'm not sure which.
Let's hope it's not a bad answer.
No, I agree with it, though. I mean, and it may be a bad answer, but I like it. So, yeah, and okay, I don't know if I'm getting ahead, Caleb. If so, I'm sorry. Another thing that we sometimes use interchangeably, I'm pondering this, is, the word supernatural and the word miracle. And like what I'm thinking right now is, as Christians, we believe that God's Spirit is at work in us, let's say guiding and convicting, and, not in these sensationalistic, charismatic ways maybe, but he is at work. Okay. And if it's God, then it's, it's beyond natural. So we would say we're having, in a sense, a supernatural experience whenever God so works in us, which he constantly is doing, right? But at the same time, I don't want to call those miracles, because I think we intend to mean something different or more exceptional to that when we use the word miracle, like Jesus rose from the dead is a miracle. Whereas the Spirit's guidance and conviction of our sin on a daily basis is supernatural. It's beyond what natural, bodily mechanics, biology, brain chemistry would affect in me, in my life. So it's supernatural. But I don't want to say that that's the same as what we usually mean by miracle, right?
Yeah, so I'd agree with you. And maybe that's, in my mind, that's not so complicated, because whatever God is doing with my spirit, he's doing with my spirit, which is itself not natural. So but may result in me doing something in the natural world.
Good point. Right.
So if he's dealing with, if his spirit is dealing with my spirit, that's happening by definition in a spiritual realm, a supernatural realm. And so Well, that's
Okay, so one of the elements here by what we mean by miracle is it's a breaking in or interrupting or injecting of some
yeah.
sort, not
Was
a
it
violating.
Caleb said?
Injecting.
Was it supervene? Who said supervene? I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. It's like it's not a violation. There's no law to violate, so to speak. Natural laws are what happens when the natural world is left to its natural processes, and human agents or agent causation can supervene that. God can supervene that, quote, miraculously. I can supervene natural events in a natural way. I can't do it miraculously.
Right.
So before we move on, I'm going to do some more interaction with people here. So Ethan Callison threw out some definitions for us that I think are pretty to the point. So he said that unlikely is still possible. Improbable is not denying, but no proof of it happening. And impossible as cannot happen. I think those are pretty good and direct to the point. And we've, of course, expanded a little bit, but I think, in a general conversation, that would at least put somebody on the same terms for a discussion on this topic. And then Michelle commented again, so for specific examples using these words, if people pray and someone is cured of cancer and they had a very bad outcome, and there's a result such as someone believes in God as a result, would that be a miracle? It's improbable, but not impossible.
See, that's complicated. I think it would depend on the nature of the outcome, like how that outcome came across. I think if the result's the same, but the method could be explained naturally, then I might attribute that to providence, not miracle. If it's something that seems like the cure couldn't happen naturally, then maybe I'd say the cure was natural. And both, I think God uses both, and so both are gracious and wonderful, but just to define terms.
That's a good point. I think that we may not always know with certainty whether something is a miracle.
Sure.
I think there are probably a lot of miracles that happen where we do write it up to chance. And I think there are a lot of times where chance may be taken as a miracle. So I think that's why that communicative part of the definition is so important. And it's hard to say. Ethan jumped in here and said, great point, Kevin, on the Spirit's guidance on a daily basis, and that being supernatural. It is a miracle that God breathes his Spirit into us to begin with.
Yes, it is.
For sure.
Yeah.
Ethan, yes.
Okay, and Michelle had a follow-up from her comment as well. Would it be different if it was an immediate and complete curing or curing through treatment?
Yeah, I'd say yes, and then agree with Caleb, which is sometimes we can tell, and maybe sometimes it does seem obvious what is truly miraculous, and then maybe sometimes it gets a little cloudy. Like maybe it wasn't immediate, but it was really quick. Like it doesn't really seem like that could happen naturally. Maybe it could. Maybe it's improbable. Is it really impossible? I think if I was really gonna draw the line and say this is miraculous, I'd have to have a pretty good understanding that what happened was naturally impossible. Like that doesn't happen naturally. Like Jesus' resurrection from the dead, that's a miracle. Like that's a miracle because people do not rise again after rotting in a tomb for 3 days. Or on the third day. It doesn't happen. Doesn't naturally happen. But people can recover from wounds, and maybe even miraculously or through providence. Providence is not to be, just shoot away as unimportant.
And Ethan commented on this as well. He said the cure could be supernaturally revealed to someone to see the natural solution.
Huh.
That's another good point. I
I
mean,
like that. Yeah. That's
how much of medicine these days is anything short of miraculous in a lot of ways?
Yeah, and this reminds me of good and healthy ways that people pray. Sometimes prayers are, God, if you would just cure this person miraculously, that would be wonderful. Or perhaps, Lord, it's in your providence or in your will to just, lead the doctors to the correct cure. And so that's all well and good. I like it.
And I'll say my definition of miracle has had to expand somewhat the more I've thought on it, because in a similar scenario, I had a retinal detachment about 5.5, 6 years ago at this point, and I let it go untreated for over a year. I didn't know what had went on, and so I let it go untreated and didn't do anything. Thank you, Haley. And I didn't do anything about it for over a year. When I came in, the doctor said, "You've had a retinal detachment. You got to go see a specialist now." They had me set up for surgery the next day. And before the surgery, my small group had actually prayed over this whole situation and prayed over me. I'd never had this done kind of before, and went in for surgery the next day. Come to find out, people who've had retinal detachments for, even a few days without treatment can go completely blind. To go a year without treatment of something like this it's really unheard of that any of your vision would come back. And it was a gradual process for the healing, but 6 months later I was at a point where my vision in that eye is now 20/40. I mean, it's almost normal, despite the unreal improbability of me having that kind of vision. So I think that's another one that goes kind of along with Michelle's example is, is it a miracle? I think that's a personal question as to the time that occurred in my life and the communicative meaning that came from that. And Ethan said, "Amen," and how to pray, Charles.
Yeah, well, I didn't invent it.
Okay, so let me see. I think I've got... Nope, that was it for the definitions. So now we're going to take a look at what the miracle challenges are. And so these are some of the challenges I think Christians see most often about miracle claims. So some of these challenges: the Bible contains miracles and is therefore false. Why don't miracles happen today? Ancient people were more gullible, so why should we trust their claims about miracles? Miracles only occur in fairy tales. Miracles are just highly improbable, but given enough time, they'll occur. Anything anybody in the chat or on here would add to this list as to challenges they've heard about miracles or challenges they would make about miracles?
Along the lines would be something like miracle by definition is unscientific, therefore science rules it out. That's similar to what some others you got.
Yeah, I think that's a good one though, to pull in the science piece is often comes in.
But that's similar to ancient people were more gullible. What they mean is they weren't as scientific as we are.
And here's a really good distinction, I think, that adds to that. So the challenge that they were actually possible things, but people at the time didn't understand how.
Zeus and lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this idea of science is discovering more and more
God of the gaps.
physical. Yeah, right. So what they called a miracle.
Right.
But I think most of the things that we call miracle, they still would, and still aren't possible.
Well, see, I like that. Well, I don't know if we're into dealing with these claims here, but yeah. So I think by the definitions we're putting down here, what we're saying is, if the things that we're declaring, as you said, the things we're declaring as that would be declared as miracles now aren't going to be discovered in some future time as science. Like science isn't going to get there because it's not a lack of knowledge that we're basing these miraculous claims on. We're not saying God of the gaps. We don't understand where lightning comes from, so it must be a miracle. We're saying no. We understand how nature works in this place, and from what we know, this isn't possible. So it's not a lack of knowledge. It's the knowledge itself that's leading to our understanding that this is a miracle. So I don't know. Get to start dealing with these yet?
Yeah. So now we're going to look at, I think it's really important in this subject that we look at the worldviews that encompass different perspectives. So we might be able to agree somewhat across the board on definitions, but somebody's worldview is going to make a drastic difference in terms of how they approach this topic. And I think that's where most of these challenges of miracles come from. So for me, in addressing this topic, that was kind of the approach I wanted to take is let's look at the worldviews behind perspectives. And I think that addresses the majority of the issues people take with miracles. And certainly people are welcome to call me out if I'm wrong on that as we go through here too. So the main thing we're going to do is look at a comparison of worldviews, and then we will look at kind of how to actually investigate miracle claims. Sound like a plan?
Yeah.
Good plan.
Okay. Michelle had another comment, and I think we're live streaming just about a minute or so behind what's going on in our conversation here. So I'm trying to not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Right.
Michelle said, agreed, using Jesus's resurrection for the example. We are not anticipating it will ever be possible for someone to come back to life after being dead for 3 days.
Right, correct. Or even if we discover how to do that later, like maybe technology can discover how to do that, but it wasn't ever possible then.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Good point.
Yeah, good point, Michelle.
All right, so let's see if we can, we're coming up about on time here. So before moving on, I want to kind of break down and start talking about worldviews a little bit. Ethan had another comment. He's got to get off here, but he said, thank you guys for advancing the gospel. Need to hop off, but praying over each of you now. Thanks, Ethan. We appreciate that.
Yes.
So I wanted to look at where we kind of draw the line with things. So I kind of broke it down like this. So we have normal events in life that kind of happen all the time. We have unlikely events that are expected, or that are not expected or out of the ordinary. So, things that could happen, but we don't see it happen much. We have improbable, where we might be able to calculate the odds for something or know that it's extremely unlikely. And then at the end, we have impossible. So things that don't happen or essentially have zero chance. So it was helpful for me to think of this kind of on a spectrum versus kind of other ways we could break it down. And I wanted to take a look at Christianity, and I think that, you can draw the line of Christianity believes that miracles are possible. So the line is really there all the way at the end, and I think that one good example of this is, of course, the Big Bang. Nothing doesn't come from nothing. So, if you believe the Big Bang, that's one of the most impossible things that could ever happen. Creation of
and that's science, by the way.
Right. Same thing with abiogenesis. So, if you believe life came from non-life in some way, shape, or form, that's pretty close to impossible as well in terms of what we know scientifically. Naturalism is kind of the competing worldview we're going to be looking at. So, we could have someone who is an atheist or agnostic and doesn't hold to strict naturalism. Be harder for an atheist, but agnostic could at least believe in a supernatural force of some kind and not believe in strict naturalism. And you could draw the line here at the high end of unlikely. Or maybe here, somewhere in improbable. Or, maybe all the way up here towards the end of improbable. Or if you're a proponent of abiogenesis, then probably up here somewhere in the impossible, at least from a scientific perspective. So Big Bang and abiogenesis may even draw the line way up here into the impossible. So it's kind of a little bit of a shaky scale as to where you can draw the line. Now, one way that was helpful for me to break this down, and we were kind of starting to discuss this in our last live meeting, was kind of actually looking at odds and kind of using that as at least a guidepost. And so I think, anywhere below a 1 in 10 chance is something that probably occurs relatively normally. Unlikely, I'd say, is probably from 1 in 10 to 1 in 500. Improbable, I gave a pretty wide berth to and said,
Yeah, it's pretty wide.
Over 1 in 500 to 1 in 10 to the 45th power. So that's one with 45 zeros after it. And I did that for a mathematical and scientific reason, which is that after that 1 in 10 to the 45th, essentially, scientifically, things are considered essentially zero chance at that point because it is so unlikely. One example that I think is actually more like 1 in 10 to the 38th is if every atom in the universe were a blind man solving a Rubik's Cube, it would be like them all solving that Rubik's Cube at the exact same time. Just to think about some of the volume of this.
That's a lot of Rubik's Cubes.
Right. And so I think once you kind of begin crossing that line, you're looking at, 1 in 10 to the 45th to incalculable for impossible. What do you guys think? Does that kind of line up? Or?
That jives with the numbers I know. Maybe for people that are unfamiliar with big numbers like 1 times 10 or 1 in 10 to the 45th or numbers like that. These are actually not Christian throwing out their numbers. These are mathematical numbers that mathematicians have actually given definitions, 1 to the 45, 1 to the 50th, maybe 1 to the 80th, depending on which guy you're talking to. But there are fractional numbers that mathematicians have said this is basically equivalent to impossible, which is it's kind of hard for the layman to understand. It's like, wait a minute, there's still that little tiny chance. It's not really impossible because there's still the one there at the top of the fraction. But the chances that these numbers are so big and so improbable, and given all the particle events that could actually happen in the known history of the universe, it still wouldn't happen. So it's like, yeah, the one's there, but based on the number of seconds that have existed in the known universe and number of particles and the speed of light and all this other stuff, it's like it doesn't happen. There's no chance of it happening. It's a big number. Rubik's Cubes are hard.
Yeah. Well, I think this is as good a place as any to kind of stop for the night. Any kind of final thoughts before we kind of close out? Anybody in chat still there that has a comment? Michelle said she was loving the conversation. Had to put some kids to bed, but she'll be back. So I don't know if she'll be back before we're done, but
I'd like to add one, and then
yeah.
I definitely want to hear what other people want to close with. But I'd like to say this. I think the study into miracles is definitely worthy of study and even honoring to God. But I guess I'd want to caution for Christianity to be the search for the miraculous, especially in the day-to-day life. I think we acknowledge miracles where they seem to happen, especially historically. But the gospel itself is good enough. You know, the fact that I was destined and deserved to go to hell and was rescued by a Savior who rescued me, that's good enough in itself. And so if I don't have miracles, not that I shouldn't pray for them, I think it's fine. It's wonderful to pray for God's miracles and providence in our life. But, you know, just living this daily life, the gospel is good enough. I think maybe that's one of the dangers that you were pointing to early on is, you know, when we pray for miracles, they don't happen. It's like, pray for miracles. If they don't happen, just trust that God's providence is good enough. Gospel's good enough in itself.
I think that's a great point.
It's a great point to end on. I think can't improve on that.
Yeah, same here. So we'll leave off at that. Since this video will still be up for people to view later.
It's so scary.
I know, right?
It's never going away.
Etched in the internet
Permanent.
Forever. So
It's a miracle.
You could say so.
I could say that.
So, you know, if people have comments after, I know I'll certainly try and interact with comments that come up, but if anybody has any comments about the format, if anybody wants to join in for next week or week after next, we'll stick with every 2 weeks for the time being, which is usually when we do our meeting. And but if anybody has any comments, you liked it, you hated it, you can't stand this format, whatever, we're certainly interested in feedback. Again, this is an interactive group. Thanks so much to Michelle and Ethan for being a part of the discussion tonight with us. If anybody is interested in coming on here live with us, you know, you don't have to show your face, but if you want to come live next time and be a part of the discussion verbally too, that would be great. We would love that. So, yeah, that's all I got for now.
Like it.
All right. Well, we will close it out. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We look forward to more interaction. Strange we got to do this rather than meet in person, but hey, we've got the technology, so we might as well.
Yeah, man.
All right. Over and out.